guys, so here we are, we're at my whiteboard, and on my whiteboard here I've drawn out sort of a spectrum, if you will, of the ketogenic to the carnivore diet. And in between these two diets you've got hypercarnivore, and I'm going to go into each one of those in depth and detail. But what I do want to sort of stress about these three diets is that they really all share what we call fat adaptation, keto adaptation, and they fall along a spectrum. But they're all keto adapted, fat adapted diets. What does that mean? That means that you no longer burn carbohydrates as your fuel source. You reduce your carbohydrate intake so much that now you're burning fat and what we call ketone bodies for fuel. And so the three of these diets share that commonality. So they're all three very low to no carb. And it's basically, the theory behind these diets is that, we're trying to follow what our ancestors, or as close as we can to what our ancestors ate. And that really is just better for our physiology overall, rather than the processed foods and things like that, what you get in the American Standard Diet ultimately. The idea is to get to a more whole foods approach here with single food ingredient type things, where you don't have a lot of additives, things like that. And of course, a huge emphasis on protein and fat. Okay, so this is kind of how they all are the same, and they fall under this umbrella. Like I said, I call it the fat adapted, keto adapted lifestyle spectrum. So this is a big lifestyle change. For you to take on any of these diets, it's something that you kind of have to understand you're totally committing to, because you're absolutely changing your physiology around to adapt to this fat burning, fat ketone body fuel system that you're going to be going under. So now when we go down here, we know what they all share. So now how are they different? So we're going to look here at the carb count. And on each one of these diets, the carb count is going to vary. What do I mean by carb count? So how many carbohydrates you're allowed or allotted each day, sort of like your checking account, kind of like a bank account that you're going to keep track of ultimately. So with the ketogenic diet, you have a little bit of flexibility with your carbohydrate intake. You can eat anywhere between 15 to 30 carbohydrates a day, depending on your needs and your physiology. And needs meaning, what are you trying to go for here? So this one, you have a lot more of a carbohydrate allotment per day. Now, as you transition over to hypercarnivore, you're going to eat, anywhere between like 10 to maybe 15 carbs a day on average. And then, of course, as we progress further into more of a carnivore diet, that is more like 10 to 0 carbs a day. So the next thing where they contrast is basically the meat content. A lot of people going into a ketogenic diet, they kind of don't put as much emphasis on the protein as they do when we're talking about hypercarnivore and carnivore. They have a lot more focus on the protein. Of course, they all focus on fat. But the varying difference here is protein mainly. So with ketogenic diet, you want about anywhere between 40 to 70% meat content. When you move on to the hypercarnivore diet, that one is 70% meat-based or more. And then when you move to the carnivore diet, basically that is 100% meat-based, 100%. Which leads me down to the third thing that they all differ on, and that's basically plant-based content foods. When I say plant-based, I mean vegetables, fruits, seeds, nuts, herbs, spices, anything that comes from a plant, basically. So with ketogenic, once again, you have sort of a nice flexibility window here of 30 to 60% plant-based material that you'll be ingesting in this diet. That varies because you are incorporating dairy, and some people can tolerate dairy, some people cannot tolerate dairy. So that one you have a lot more. As we move along this spectrum, hypercarnivore, you're now reducing your plant intake, mainly your vegetable intake, quite significantly to about 30% or less. This allows you to stay within this 10 to 15 carb window. So that's kind of where you get your flexibility, but you're taking in a lot more meat in this diet. So your focus is more so on that versus plants. Now once we move over to carnivore, pretty much zero plants, anything from a plant, nothing. Totally meat-based, that's carnivore. So now the very last thing here where they differ significantly is in the dairy content. You've got a lot more wiggle room with your carbohydrate allotment in the ketogenic diet so that you can incorporate dairy and other things like that. Same thing in hypercarnivore. You're still consuming a good bit of dairy because a lot of dairy doesn't have a bunch of carbs in it, but you're limited on what kind of dairy. With that being said, you can't get sugary yogurts and things like that. You've got to eat, cheeses that are on zero carb and things like along those lines, basically. In carnivore, generally there's zero dairy, generally. Some people would argue that and say, no, you can still be carnivore and eat dairy because an animal makes that product. It comes from an animal ultimately. So there's an argument with that, really. Another argument with carnivore, some people within that group basically will eat honey, for example, and the honey does come from, it's something an animal makes, it's a product of an animal. And so, there's some people that argue that yes, that's carnivore too, and then others that do not. And then some people just say it's totally not ketogenic at all because it is sugar. A lot of people go into these diets are for varying reasons. A lot of times you may be just looking to lose some weight. You might be dealing with some skin issues, some autoimmune issues. You might just be dealing with bloating and just fatigue and brain fog and things like that. And so what these three lifestyle diets offer is a better management of your blood sugar as well, and with that being said, a better management of your insulin as well. So when you're able to keep your blood sugar and insulin at a nice manageable level, that really gets a lot of the inflammatory processes out of your body and allows you to recover, heal, that kind of thing. You're trying to get off carbs, and carbs basically, it has a very addictive quality. So it's like you're trying to break these addictions that you've had for a while and habits. So getting off of those things can be a bit of a process. And, I always say start where it works best for you because you don't want to make it more difficult on yourself than it really needs to be at the end of the day. Because, it is what it is. It's a little bit of a challenge because you are getting rid of a lot of things that you may be accustomed to having on a daily basis. So for me, I did the same thing. I started ketogenic and I kind of worked my way over. And, over time I got things out of my diet. And I transitioned all the way to carnivore, and I was there for about 3 months, full carnivore. And then after that period, after I healed and a lot of my inflammation went away and the bloating I was dealing with, I started to add other things back in that did not bother me and cause any kind of reaction. So that ended up I'm more in like a hypercarnivore phase of this diet lifestyle. The other thing I didn't talk about here that's really important is the fact that you have to, when you're on this diet, you're burning fat for fuel. And so it's important for you to get a good ratio of fat to protein in here. So I always say to start out, I do a 1-to-1 ratio, fat to protein. And it's always easier to pick a fatty meat because you eat the meat, you eat the fat, you're done. You don't have to try to pair something with a very lean meat, like, oh, what else can I put with this to make it fatty, right? So that makes carnivore and hypercarnivore very easy because you just find, eat a ribeye versus a fillet or something like that. Ribeye, you're done. You don't need anything else. So like with the ketogenic diet, when you're trying to put in fat content, sometimes people don't really like fatty meats in the beginning, so they'll eat more lean meats. I went through that myself. And so with keto, you can kind of pair in some fatty vegetable options. So you can pick a vegetable that's a little fattier, like avocados, for example. You can take that and pair that with your meal to fatten it up a little bit. You can also take dairy and do that. And, of course you can with your meat as well. But as you move on to hypercarnivore, you really don't, majority of your diet and your intake is meat. So you really have to use like meat-based products if you do eat something lean to kind of fatten that up. So if I don't eat a ribeye, let's say I have like a filet or something more lean, I'll probably pair that with, I have some bacon with it. I can have some eggs with it. I can do it that way, and that'll fatten it up too. So you can use meat-based products to add fat to your diet. Butter is another way to do that. You can add butter to your coffee. You can add butter to your meal, and it'll definitely fatten it up. So same thing as you move on to carnivore, you really don't have any plant options there, so you are totally cooking with meat-based oils, like, you're going to cook with beef tallow, rendered duck fat, bacon grease. It's going to be an animal product oil that you're cooking with, and everything that you get your nutrients and vitamins and everything from is going to be from the animal meat-based, period. In terms of where you're coming from in your lifestyle, that's what's going to determine which one's going to be the best diet option for you. If you're trying to overcome a lot of carbohydrate addictions, you really aren't restricting yourself in your diet at all. You just kind of eat whatever. Ketogenic is where I personally would say start. Now, if you've already taken out a lot of fried foods and pastas and breads and things like that, but you still are maybe eating some vegetables and that kind of thing, hypercarnivore, you could jump in right there. That's really not too bad at all. I just would not recommend anyone going straight to carnivore just because that is quite a jump. People that go straight to carnivore generally are people that have autoimmune conditions, gut issues like SIBO, diverticulitis, things like that. Even people that are diabetic and they're trying to fight that and recover from it and heal their bodies. Generally, and even cancer patients for that matter, go to this diet. It's like it's the ultimate elimination diet, basically. But it gets all this inflammatory stuff out of your diet. And like I said, it's a very healing diet. And that's why people will jump to that. It's like you're at your wit's end. You can't take anymore. You're tired of being ill. Carnivore. I have another video that I'm going to be doing for plant-based toxins. So I know you're probably like, well, why do you take vegetables? Why are you taking vegetables out? What's wrong with vegetables? Well, the problem with vegetables, and I'm just going to be brief about this because it goes beyond the scope of this video, but the thing about plant-based products is plants have, mechanisms in their cell wall, chemicals built into their cell walls and structures to protect them from predators so they don't get eaten. They, just like all of us, want to survive, and they want their seeds and offspring to survive. And so they don't want them to be eaten. And when you eat them, they cause inflammatory responses from a lot of these plant chemicals that they produce. Two of them, lectins, that's one, and another one's oxalates. There's a whole slew of them. And I'm going to dedicate a month just to explaining plants and plant toxins and how they affect our bodies and which plants are, where the plants fall on this toxic spectrum so that you can kind of understand, I could probably eat this, don't eat that, and this is why. Basically, that is why we're constantly removing these plants. Not to mention they do have carbohydrates as well, and so when you're trying to get your carb count low, that's another area where you want to reduce that down. And there you have it, friends. That is basically the overview of the keto-adapted, fat-adapted lifestyle spectrum of the ketogenic diet, hypercarnivore diet, and carnivore diet. Basically, I hope this was enough information for you to kind of get an idea about what they're all about and where you may fall on that spectrum if you do decide to move in this direction with your diet and lifestyle. If you found the information on this video helpful, please hit the like button and leave some comments down below for me. And also, if you'd like to get more content like this, be sure to subscribe and I'll send a lot of videos your way. Thanks again, and I wish you well.